The auctioneer's voice cut through the Texas heat like a blade. One barren mail-order bride. 3 years married, no children to show for it. Senna stood on the makeshift platform, her wedding dress torn at the shoulder, dust settled into the white fabric like grief. The rope around her wrists had rubbed raw. She kept her chin up. The alternative was drowning. What am I bid for this useless woman? The crowd pressed closer. Faces she recognized from church socials and market days. Mrs. Henderson who sold eggs. The banker's wife who always smiled so sweet. Now they stared like she was livestock gone. Lame. Her husband Garrett leaned against the general store post, arms crossed. 3 years of marriage had carved lines around his mouth. Hard lines. He spat tobacco juice into the dust. She's cursed, he called out. Can't give a man what he needs. Heat rose from the wooden platform through her worn boots. The sun beat. Down merciless. Senna's throat felt like sand, but she wouldn't ask for water. Not from these people, not anymore. A man in a black coat stepped forward. What's her asking price? Starting bid is $10, the auctioneer announced. But gentlemen, consider the work she can do. She's got strong hands. Good for washing, cooking, cleaning. Strong hands. Senna looked down at her fingers. These hands had delivered 3 babies in the colored section of town. Had sewn quilts that kept families warm. Had mixed medicines that broke fevers. But they couldn't make her womb quicken. In Garrett's eyes, that made them worthless. $12, called a voice from the back. Senna found the speaker. A rail-thin man with yellow teeth. She'd seen him before at the saloon. The way he looked at her now made her skin crawl. The bidding continued. $15, 18, 20. Each number felt like a nail in a coffin. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Baby girl, you worth more than gold. Don't let nobody tell you different. But grandmother was dead, and worth was what people would pay. $25. The voice belonged to a woman. Madame. Volkov stepped through the crowd like a shark through water. Her dress was fine black silk, but her eyes held no warmth. I'll take her off your hands. Senna's blood turned cold. She'd heard whispers about Madame Volkov's place. Women went in. They didn't come out. At least not the same. 25 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Movement at the edge of the crowd caught Senna's eye. A group of Comanche had gathered near the trading post. They watched with the stillness of people who understood survival. 1 man stepped forward from their midst. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with weathered hands and eyes that missed nothing. 5 children stood behind him like steps on a ladder. The oldest boy, maybe 12, held a baby girl with dark curls. The child's skin was bronze like her father's, but her hair caught the light different, familiar. $50. The crowd turned. Murmurs rippled through the gathered people. The Comanche man's voice carried quiet authority. He didn't repeat himself. Madame Volkov's lips thinned. 55. 75. The auctioneer's gavel trembled in his hand. This was more money than most folks saw in a year. 75 going once. Going twice. Madame Volkov studied the Comanche man's face. Whatever she saw there made her step back. Keep her. Sold to the gentleman for $75. The crowd began to disperse. Show was over. Senna remained frozen on the platform. Her knees felt weak. The Comanche man approached with measured steps. His children followed. He pulled a knife from his belt. Senna flinched. Instead of harm, he cut the ropes binding her wrists. The hemp fell away like dead skin. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The leather was soft, worn smooth by years of use. It smelled of smoke and sage and something else. Safety. Garrett pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger. You don't know what you're buying, Indian. She's damaged goods, barren as a salt flat. The Comanche man looked at Garrett with the patience of someone who'd seen many small, angry men. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "In my world, we do not throw away what can be healed." He turned to Senna. "Come," she followed. What choice did she have? But as they walked toward the horses, the baby girl in the oldest boy's arms reached out tiny fingers toward her. The child's eyes were bright with curiosity, not fear. "What's her name?" Senna whispered to the boy. "Winona," he answered, his voice guarded. "She's my sister." But something in the child's face tugged at Senna's memory. The curve of her cheek. The way her lip curved when she smiled. Like looking into a mirror that showed the past. The Comanche man helped her onto a horse. His touch was gentle, respectful. Nothing like Garrett's rough hands. As they rode away from Sweetwater, Senna looked back once. The auction platform stood empty now, wood bleached white by the sun. She was leaving behind everything she'd known, the life that had broken her, the husband who'd sold her like property, the town that had watched her humiliation, without protest. But as little Winona babbled in the strange, musical language of her people, Senna felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of hope. Fragile as a bird's wing, but real. The desert stretched ahead, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time in 3 years, Senna wasn't walking into it alone. The horses moved through country that had forgotten gentleness. Red earth stretched toward mountains that cut the sky sharp as broken glass. Senna rode behind the man who'd bought her freedom, her hands gripping the saddle horn, white-knuckled. His name was Talon. She'd learned this from listening to his children speak their liquid language. The oldest boy, Coda, watched her with eyes that held too much responsibility. The girls, Ayana and Nayeli, whispered to each other and giggled. The younger boy, Dakota, slept against his father's back. But it was Winona who drew Senna's attention. The baby rode in a cradle board, dark eyes tracking every movement. When their eyes met, the child smiled. Not the vacant grin of most babies, but something knowing. Something that made Senna's chest tighten. The sun carved their shadows long against the desert floor. No one spoke. The silence felt heavy with questions neither could ask in the other's language. They rode until the light failed. The camp appeared, as if conjured from the earth itself. Hide lodges rose from the valley floor like sleeping giants. Fires dotted the darkness. Smoke carried the scent of cooking meat and something else. Home. Senna had never seen anything like it. The organized chaos of a people who moved when they needed to move, who built what they needed and left the rest behind. It was beautiful in its simplicity, terrifying in its strangeness. A crowd gathered as they approached. Faces painted gold by firelight, old women with lined faces and knowing eyes, young men with weapons at their sides, children who stared at her with curiosity instead of fear. An older man stepped forward. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. Gray streaked his long hair, and his face bore the weathered dignity of someone who'd made hard choices and lived with them. Talon dismounted and spoke in rapid Comanche. The older man's eyes never left Senna's face. She felt weighed, measured, found wanting or worthy, she couldn't tell which. "This is Chief Joaquin," Talon said carefully. "He asks why you are here." Senna slid from the horse, her legs shaking. The coat Talon had given her hung loose on her shoulders. She pulled it tighter. "I don't know." Truth was simpler than lies. She'd learned that the hard way. Chief Joaquin spoke again. His voice carried the authority of mountains. "He says our people do not take in strays lightly," Talon translated. "The white world brings troubles. He asks if you will bring trouble to us." Senna thought of Garrett's face when the gavel fell, of Madame Volkov's cold smile, of the town that had watched her humiliation without protest. "I hope not." The chief studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke to Talon, gesturing toward the center of camp. Talon nodded once, You will stay tonight, he told Senna. Tomorrow we decide. A woman approached from the crowd. Her hair was silver white, her face mapped with lines that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. She wore a dress of soft doeskin decorated with beadwork that caught the firelight. I am Myra, she said in clear English. I will show you where to sleep. Senna followed her to a small lodge at the camp's edge. Inside, buffalo robes covered the ground. A fire pit sat cold in the center. It was sparse but clean. More shelter than she'd expected. You are not what I thought, Myra said, settling. Beside the fire pit with practiced ease, what did you think? A woman who would break easy. You have scars, but they run clean. That is good. Infected wounds poison everything they touch. Senna touched her wrist where the rope had rubbed raw. I'm not sure I'm strong enough for this. Strength is not about never falling. It is about what you do when you hit the ground. Outside, children's voices carried on the night air. Senna recognized Koda's deeper tones among them. The sound of a family settling for sleep. His wife, Senna said quietly. What happened to her? Myra's hand stilled. Some questions have thorns. Best to let them be until you know how to handle them without bleeding. But she's gone. Death is the only certainty. How we honor the dead, how we care for what they left behind, that is what matters. Senna nodded. She understood loss. Understood the weight of caring for what remained. The children, she said. Are they all his? Love makes more parents than blood. Myra's eyes held. Secrets. You will learn this. The fire crackled to life as Myra fed it dried grass and small sticks. Light danced across the lodge walls. Senna watched the flames and tried not to think about tomorrow's decision. Why did he buy me? She asked. Why do you think? Pity, or maybe he needed someone to cook and clean. Myra's laugh was soft as wind through grass. You know nothing about that man. Pity is not in his nature. Neither is waste. Then what? Some things must be discovered. Not explained. Sleep now. Tomorrow will bring its own truths. Senna lay on the buffalo robes, Talon's coat pulled tight around her. The leather had molded to her shoulders, creating a cocoon of warmth. Through the lodge walls, she could hear the camp settling. Quiet conversations, a baby crying. The sound of a people who belonged somewhere. She'd never belonged anywhere. Not really. Her parents had died when she was young. Her grandmother had raised her with love but died before Senna turned 20. Garrett had offered marriage and a home, but it had been a trap disguised as shelter. Now she lay in a Comanche lodge, surrounded by people who spoke a language she didn't understand, in a world that operated by rules she'd never learned. But for the first time in years she felt safe. Sleep came slowly. Her dreams were filled with smoke and sage and the sound of children laughing. In her dreams, a baby with dark curls reached for her with tiny fingers. In her dreams, she was someone worth reaching for. When she woke, pale light filtered through the lodge walls. Outside, the camp was stirring. Women's voices mixed with the sounds of morning preparation. The scent of cooking food made her stomach clench with hunger. Myra entered carrying a bowl of something that smelled like heaven. Eat, then we will see what you are made of. The first week moved like water, finding its level. Senna woke before dawn, helped with morning meals, learned the rhythm of a people who lived by the sun's passage. Her hands remembered work even when her mind stumbled over customs. The women watched her with careful eyes. Not hostile but measuring. They spoke in clusters, their voices rising and falling in patterns she couldn't decode. Sometimes she caught them looking at her, then at Talon's children, then back at her. Koda was the hardest to reach. He followed her movements with the intensity of a hawk tracking prey. When she approached the fire where he sat with his siblings, he gathered them closer. A 12-year-old boy playing father to children who'd already lost too much. You don't trust me, she said one morning. finding him alone by the horses. He looked up from braiding a rope. His hands never stopped moving. Should I? I don't know, but I'm not leaving. People say that. His voice carried weight no child should bear. Then they do. Senna watched his fingers work the rope. Quick, sure movements learned from necessity. Who left? Death, sickness, the white soldiers who came before winter. He tested the ropes. Strength, my mother. She didn't choose to leave. Leaving is leaving. He stood, coiling the rope with practiced efficiency. Winona cries for her every night. She's too young to understand dead. The baby had been crying. Senna heard it through the lodge walls, soft whimpers that cut through her sleep. She'd wanted to help but hadn't known her place, hadn't known if she had one. I could sit with her, she offered. If you need sleep, Coda's eyes narrowed. Why? Because crying babies should be comforted. Because you're carrying too much for someone your age. He studied her face, searching for lies. Finding none, he nodded once. Tonight. But I stay. 2. That evening, Senna sat cross-legged on buffalo robes while Winona fussed in her arms. The baby's cries had a quality that reached deep, past thought into instinct. Senna's body remembered movements she'd thought forgotten. The gentle sway. The soft humming that seemed to rise from somewhere ancient. The baby settled. Her dark eyes fixed on Senna's face with startling intensity. She reached up with tiny fingers, grasping at air until Senna offered her thumb. The grip was strong, determined. She likes you, Coda said from his place by the fire. Surprise colored his voice. Children know things adults forget. What things? Who means them harm? Who doesn't? Winona made soft sounds, not quite words but clearly communication. Senna found herself responding in the same nonsense language, a conversation that made perfect sense to both of them. She never does that, Coda whispered. Not since Mother died. Something shifted in Senna's chest. A recognition that had nothing to do with logic. She looked down at the baby's face, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the pattern of her breathing, the way her hair caught the firelight. Tell me about your mother, she said. Coda's face closed. She was beautiful and kind, and she's gone. What was her name? Ayana. Like my sister. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Father named the baby after her. Said she was the last gift Mother gave us. But Winona didn't look Comanche. Her features were different, softer. Her skin darker than her siblings. Her hair curled in ways that spoke of different ancestors. She's adopted, Coda said, following her gaze. Father found her when she was newborn. Some white man sold her to him, said the mother was dead. The words hit Senna like cold water. She looked down at the baby in her arms, really looked, and saw her own features reflected back. The same mouth, the same stubborn chin, the same hands that grasped at the world with fierce determination. When? She whispered. 3 winters ago. Just after Mother died, giving birth to a son who followed her into the spirit world. 3 winters. The timing carved itself into Senna's bones. She'd given birth 3 winters ago. To a daughter Garrett said had died. A daughter she'd never been allowed to see, never allowed to hold, never allowed to mourn properly. The baby in her arms gurgled, a sound of pure contentment. She'd stopped crying the moment Senna picked her up. Stopped fighting the world long. Enough to rest. What did the white man look like? Senna asked, her voice carefully neutral. I don't know. I was hunting with Father when he brought her to camp, but Mira was there. She might remember. Senna's world tilted. She held the baby. Closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. Sage and sweetness and something else. Something that felt like coming home. She's lucky, she said finally, to have a father who would take in an orphan. Father says all children deserve love. Blood doesn't matter. But blood did matter. It mattered when you'd carried a child for 9 months, felt her moving inside you, dreamed about her face. It mattered when you'd been told she was dead, when you'd grieved for her every day since. It mattered when you found her alive in the arms of strangers who'd given her everything you couldn't. Winona fell asleep in Senna's arms, her breathing deep and even. Senna didn't want to put her down. Didn't want to break the connection that felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. "I should go," she said, though her body refused to move. "You can stay, if you want." She stayed. Sat holding the baby while Coda dozed by the fire. Outside, the camp settled into sleep. Wind moved through the lodge walls, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Senna studied Winona's face in the firelight. The baby's features were relaxed in sleep, peaceful in a way that spoke of trust, of safety, of belonging somewhere that mattered. Tomorrow she would talk to Mira, would ask the questions that needed asking, would learn the truth she already knew in her bones. But tonight she held her daughter and pretended the world was simple. Pretended that love was enough to heal all wounds. Pretended that some losses could be found again, transformed into something new. The fire burned low. Shadows danced across the lodge walls. And in the quiet space between one breath and the next, Senna began to understand that some prisons were made of lies, and some freedoms were worth any price. Senna found Mira grinding corn in the shade of her lodge. The old woman's hands moved with the patience of someone who'd performed this task 10,000 times. Each motion worn smooth by repetition. "You have questions," Mira said without looking up. "They're burning holes in your tongue." Senna sat beside her, taking up a handful of dried corn. The work gave her hands something to do while her mind searched for words. "The baby, Winona. Coda said she came from a white man." "She did. What did he look like?" Myra's grinding stone paused. "Tall, thin, eyes that held no kindness. He rode a bay horse with a white star on its forehead. Garrett's horse." Senna's hands stilled. The corn kernels scattered across the hide mat, forgotten. What did he say about the mother? That she was dead. That the child was unwanted. That he needed the money more than the burden. Each word fell like a stone into still water. Senna watched the ripples spread, changing everything they touched. Her daughter, alive, sold before she'd drawn her first breath. "You knew," she said. Quietly, "You knew when you looked at me that first night." "I suspected. The resemblance is strong, and the timing." Mira resumed her grinding. "But suspicion is not truth. Truth requires proof." "What proof?" "The child has a birthmark. Small. Crescent moon on her left shoulder. Like a brand from the spirit world." Senna's breath caught. She'd been born with the same mark. Her grandmother had called it a blessing. A sign that she belonged to something larger than herself. "There's more," Mira continued. "The man who brought her, he spoke of a wife who couldn't bear children. Said it was God's punishment for her sins." The words hit like physical blows. Senna remembered Garrett's accusations. His rage when month after month brought no quickening. His insistence that she was broken, cursed, worthless. "He lied," she whispered. "Men often do when the truth threatens their pride. But Talon, does he know?" Mira's hands never stopped their work. "What do you think?" Senna closed her eyes, remembering the auction. The way Talon had stepped forward without hesitation. The specific amount he'd bid. Not the careful increments of someone testing the waters, but the decisive action of someone with a plan. He knew. Talon is many things. Foolish is not one of them. Then why didn't he tell me? Perhaps he wanted you to discover it yourself. Perhaps he feared you would take the child and leave. Perhaps he hoped love would grow naturally, without the complications of obligation. Love, the word hung between them like morning mist. Senna thought of the nights she'd spent rocking Winona to sleep. The way her body had responded to the baby's cries. the fierce protectiveness that had bloomed in her chest. I need to talk to him. You need to be careful. Truth is a blade that cuts both ways. Once drawn, it cannot be sheathed. But Senna was already standing, brushing corn dust from her skirt. 3 years of grief and guilt had carved a hollow in her chest. The knowledge that her daughter lived, breathed, laughed in another man's arms, both filled and deepened that emptiness. She found Talon by the horse corral, working with a young stallion. His movements were patient, deliberate. He spoke to the animal in soft Comanche, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the language of wild things. "We need to talk," she said. He didn't look up from the horse. "About what?" "About my daughter." His hands stilled. On the rope. The stallion snorted, sensing the change in tension. Talon released the animal and turned to face her. "Winona is my daughter," he said carefully. "She's mine too." The words fell between them like stones into a deep well. Talon's face revealed nothing, but his shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, a man bracing for impact. "You knew," Senna continued, "at the auction. You knew who I was. I suspected. Don't lie to me. Not about this." Talon looked toward the lodge where his children played. Winona's laughter carried on the wind, bright and innocent. When he spoke again, his voice held the weight of carried secrets. The man who brought her spoke of a wife in town, described her. Sad she was. Barren, that God had cursed her. He met Senna's eyes. But the child was proof that wasn't true. "So you bought me to what? Ease your conscience?" "I bought you because a child deserves to know her mother. Because you deserve to know your daughter lived. But you didn't tell me. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought it cruel manipulation?" Senna had no answer. 3 years of grief had carved deep channels in her heart. She might have rejected the truth as impossible, might have seen it as another form of torture. "She doesn't know," she said finally. "No, to her, I am father. My children are her siblings. My wife was her mother, even in death. Your wife who died in childbirth." Talon's face went stone still. "She died bringing forth a son who couldn't live in this world. I found Winona the same day. A daughter to fill the space left by loss. Convenient, necessary for both of us." They stood in silence, the weight of revelation settling between them. The stallion had wandered to the far end of the corral, but it watched them with the wary attention of prey-sensing predators. "What happens now?" Senna asked. "That depends on you. On me? Will you take her and leave? Claim what blood says is yours?" The question cut deep. Senna thought of Koda's protective devotion, of Ayana and Nayeli's gentle acceptance, of Takoda's shy smiles, of the family unit that had embraced Winona as one of their own. "She's happy here," she said. "She loves you. And I love her. As much as any father could love a daughter. But I'm her mother. You carried her, gave her life, but I raised her. Taught her to walk, to speak, to laugh." Talon's voice carried no anger, only truth. "Which makes us family?" The question hung in the air between them. Senna watched her daughter play with the other children, her curls bouncing as she chased a butterfly. She looked healthy, loved, whole. Everything Senna had prayed for during those long nights of grief. "I don't know," she whispered. "Then we wait. Let time show us the answer." But time was a luxury they might not have. Already, whispers reached them from the trading posts. White settlers pushing west, soldiers asking questions. The world that had sold her daughter was coming closer, and it brought nothing but trouble. The riders appeared at dawn, dust clouds rising from the desert floor like smoke signals. Senna counted 6 men on horseback, their shapes dark against the pale sky. She recognized the lead rider's silhouette before she could make out his face. Garrett. The camp stirred to life around her. Women gathered children closer. Men reached for weapons with practiced ease. Chief Joaquin emerged from his lodge, his face carved from stone. "Get the children inside," Talon said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to crisis. But his eyes found Senna first, measuring her reaction. She stood frozen, watching her former husband approach. 3 months of healing unraveled in the space of a heartbeat. Her hands shook, her breathing grew shallow. "Senna." Coda appeared at her elbow, his young face tight with concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied. "Get your sisters." "Keep them." "Safe." The boy's eyes followed her gaze to the approaching riders. Understanding dawned across his features. He'd seen that look before. The hollow expression of someone watching their world collapse. "He's come for you," Coda said. "Maybe." "Will you go?" The question cut deep. Senna looked at the boy who'd become her protector, her friend, her almost son. At the lodge where Winona slept, unaware that her world balanced on a knife's edge. "I don't know." Garrett reined in his horse 20 feet from the camp's edge. His companions spread out behind him, hands resting on gun butts. The message was clear without words. "Senna," he called. "Come out, we need to talk." She didn't move. Talon stepped beside her, his presence solid as bedrock. Chief Joaquin flanked her other side. The three of them formed a wall between threat and sanctuary. "She has nothing to say to you," Talon said. His English was clearer than usual, sharpened by anger. Garrett's laugh held no humor. "You don't speak for my wife, Indian." "Ex-wife," Senna said, finding her voice. "The marriage ended when you sold me." "Sold you?" "I paid good money to have you taken off my hands. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" Garrett dismounted, his movements deliberate. He'd always been a tall man, but now he seemed diminished. 3 months of whatever he'd been doing had carved lines around his eyes, hollowed his cheeks. "You've caused me trouble, Senna. Running. Off with these savages. People are talking. Let them talk. It's not that simple. You're still legally bound to me. Still my responsibility. According to whose law? The only law that matters." Behind Garrett, his men shifted in their saddles. Senna recognized 2 of them from town. The others were strangers, hard-faced men who looked like they'd do anything for the right price. "You have no claim here," Chief Joaquin said. "The woman chose to stay. We honor her choice." "Your honor doesn't mean much to a federal judge." The words hung in the air like a threat. Senna felt the weight of eyes on her. The camp had gone quiet, waiting to see how this would play out. "What do you want?" she asked. "What's mine, you, and compensation for the trouble you've caused." "I'm not your property. The law says different." Movement from the lodge caught her eye. Winona had woken, was crawling toward the entrance on chubby legs. In seconds, she'd be visible to the men who'd come hunting. "Take the child inside," Senna said quietly to Ayana. The 10-year-old girl nodded, scooping up Winona with practiced ease. But Garrett had sharp eyes. He'd seen the movement, the careful way the family protected the baby from his sight. "That's her, isn't it?" he said. "The brat I sold to him." Talon went very still. Senna felt danger gathering like storm clouds. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Don't lie to me. I recognize those curls. That stubborn chin. She's yours, isn't she? The one I told you died." The truth sat between them like a loaded gun. Senna's silence was answer enough. "Interesting," Garrett continued. "Very interesting. I wonder what the territorial authorities would say about an Indian stealing a white man's child." "You sold her," Senna said. "I sold an orphan. Legally. But if she's actually yours, if you're alive to claim her, well, that changes things." "What do you want?" Talon asked. "My wife, my property. And $500 for the trouble you've caused." The sum was impossible. More money than the tribe had ever seen. Garrett knew it. "And if we refuse?" Chief Joaquin asked. Then, I ride back to town and tell Captain Morrison that you're harboring stolen goods. Both the woman and the child. He's got orders to clear this territory anyway. This just gives him a reason to do it permanently. The threat hit its mark. Senna saw it in the tightening of Talon's jaw, the way Chief Joaquin's hand found his knife handle. You're bluffing, she said. Am I? Morrison's been looking for an excuse to move you people along. This gives him a legal reason, self-defense, protection of white settlers. The newspapers will love it. There must be another way, Talon said. There is. Garrett's smile was cold as winter wind. She comes with me willingly, tonight. No fuss, no fighting. In exchange, I forget about the child. Let you keep your little Indian family intact. And if I refuse, then you lose everything. The child goes to a Christian orphanage. The tribe gets relocated to some reservation in the middle of nowhere. And you, he, looked at Talon. You get to watch it all happen, knowing you could have prevented it. Senna's world tilted. She thought of Kota's protective devotion, of Ayana's gentle laughter, of Takota's shy smiles, of Winona's reaching hands and trusting eyes, of Talon's quiet strength, his patient love, his willingness to sacrifice for others. I need time to think, she said. You have until sunset. Then I'm riding back to town with or without you. Garrett remounted his horse, his movements confident. He'd played this game before, knew how to use love as a weapon. Sunset, he repeated. Don't make me come looking for you. The riders disappeared into the desert heat, leaving only dust and the taste of threat in the air. Senna stood watching until they were specks on the horizon. He's not bluffing, she said finally. No, Talon agreed. He's not. Then there's only one choice. There's always a choice. Not this time. But Talon was already moving, his mind working through possibilities. He spoke quickly to Chief Joaquin and Comanche, their voices urgent. What are you planning? Senna asked. Something that might work, or might get us all killed. Tell me. Sometimes the best way to win is to change the rules. The sun climbed higher, measuring out the hours until sunset. Until choice became action. Until love would be tested by fire. The plan came together like smoke finding wind. Senna rode toward the meeting place at sunset, but she wasn't alone. Talon followed at a distance, invisible in the gathering dusk. Chief Joaquin and 3 warriors flanked them from the ridgeline. Most importantly, Captain Morrison rode with them. The army officer had arrived at camp an hour before sunset, drawn by reports of white settlers in distress. What he'd found instead was a different story entirely. Garrett waited by the old trading post. His men spread out in a loose semicircle. Confidence radiated from his posture. He'd won, and he knew it. Smart choice, he called as Senna approached. Though I expected you sooner. I needed time to gather my things. Things? His laugh was harsh. You don't own anything worth taking. I own my freedom. Not anymore, you don't. Captain Morrison emerged from the shadows, his uniform dusty, but his bearing unmistakable. Garrett's smile faltered when he saw the blue coat. Captain, Garrett said carefully, I wasn't expecting military involvement. Neither was I until I received some interesting information about human trafficking in my territory. Trafficking? I don't understand. Morrison dismounted, his movements deliberate. Let me clarify. You sold a child. A living child. To a man who believed he was buying an orphan. The child was unwanted. The child had a living mother. A mother you told was dead. A mother you then sold into what amounts to slavery. Garrett's face went pale. That's not how it happened. Isn't it? Because according to multiple witnesses, you auctioned off your wife for failing to produce children. Children you couldn't father yourself. The words hit like physical blows. Garrett's men shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. You can't prove any of that, Garrett said. Actually, I can. Morrison pulled out a folded document. Medical examination from the Army doctor. Performed this afternoon. You're sterile, Mr. Garrett. Have been for years. That's impossible. The mumps you had as a child, Dr. Henderson remembers treating you, remembers explaining the likely consequences. Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You knowingly blamed your wife for your own condition. Then sold her and her child to cover your shame. Senna watched her former husband's world crumble. The man who'd made her feel worthless stood exposed as a fraud. The satisfaction was bitter but necessary. Even if that's true, Garrett said, she's still legally my wife. Under territorial law, a marriage can be dissolved for fraud. Selling your spouse constitutes abandonment, and human trafficking is a federal crime. Morrison gestured to his men, who'd appeared from cover positions. You're under arrest. Wait, Garrett's voice cracked. There must be some mistake. The only mistake was thinking you could profit from human misery in my territory. But Garrett wasn't finished. Desperation made him dangerous. The child. She's still mine by law. I'm the legal father. No, Senna said, stepping forward. You're not. She pulled out her own document. The birth certificate she'd never seen, retrieved from the town records that afternoon. The one that listed the father as unknown. You never claimed her legally. Too afraid people would do the math. Realize she proved your lies. That doesn't matter. I raised her. You sold her before she was a day old. I provided for her, found her a home. You trafficked her. Just like you trafficked me. The fight went out of Garrett like air from a punctured bladder. He looked around at his men, at the soldiers, at the woman he'd tried to break. Found no allies. Take him, Morrison ordered. As the soldiers moved in, Garrett made one last desperate play. He lunged towards Senna, his hand reaching for the gun at his belt. He never made it. Talon appeared between them, his movement fluid as water. Garrett hit the ground hard, his weapon skittering away in the dust. That's assault, Garrett gasped. That's protection, Morrison corrected, and it's legal. They bound Garrett's hands and loaded him onto a horse. His men had already scattered, unwilling to face federal charges. Justice moved swift when it finally moved at all. What happens now? Senna asked. Now you're free. Legally and officially. Morrison tipped his hat. The child, too. No one can claim her but you. And the tribe? The tribe stays put. For now, but changes are coming. The old ways won't last forever. Morrison mounted his horse, his duty done. Ma'am, you've got a second chance. Don't waste it. They rode away into the gathering darkness, taking Garrett and his threats with them. The desert settled back into silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through sage. Senna stood alone in the empty space, feeling the weight of freedom settle on her shoulders. It was heavier than she'd expected. It's over, Talon said, materializing beside her. Is it? The legal part. The rest is up to us. They walked back, toward camp together, not touching but connected by shared experience, by the knowledge that they'd fought for something worth keeping. About Winona, Senna said. She's your daughter. Your choice. She's our daughter, our choice. The words hung between them, a bridge across the chasm of hurt and deception. Not perfect, but honest. Strong enough to build on. They reached the camp as the fires were being lit. The children ran to meet them, relief bright in their faces. Winona toddled towards Senna on unsteady legs, her arms outstretched. Mama, she said clearly, her first real word. Senna scooped her up, breathing in the scent of sage and innocence. Yes, baby, Mama's here. And Papa too, Winona added, reaching for Talon. Always, he promised. That night, they sat around the fire as a family. Not the family any of them had planned, but the one they'd chosen. Coda told stories in rapid Comanche while Ayana translated. Nayeli and Dakota played with wooden toys. Winona dozed in Senna's arms. "What comes next?" Senna asked. "We build something new. Something that honors both worlds. Is that possible?" "We'll find out." 6 months later, they stood on land they'd purchased together. Rolling hills dotted with oak trees, crossed by a clear stream. The house was small but solid, built with their own hands. Senna tended a garden where vegetables grew beside traditional medicines. Talon trained horses for settlers and soldiers alike. The children attended school in town but learned old stories at home. On quiet evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky. Travelers sometimes stopped, drawn by stories of the unusual family. The Comanche widower and his wife. The children who spoke 2 languages fluently. The woman who'd been bought and sold but found her way to freedom. Some travelers were welcomed. Others were sent on their way. But all were judged by their actions, not their origins. It wasn't perfect. The outside world still pressed close, bringing change and challenge. But within their small circle, love had proven stronger than law. Choice had triumphed over circumstance. And in the laughter of children who belonged to 2 worlds, hope took root and grew. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.